Hello, coaches. Welcome back. We are now kicking off episode 4 of our 5-part series on skill acquisition. And after coming through 3 of our content experts, we are now ready to talk some hockey. And we are honored today to have with us, all the way from Switzerland, in Zug, Ted Suihkonen, where he holds the role of head of development with EV Zug in the Swiss League. Ted, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Brian, first off, I'm honored to be part of this group. You've had some fantastic speakers already, and just to be included in all these guys, it's very humbling. I'm here in Switzerland now. It's been a long journey. I'm actually from northern Minnesota in Duluth, where I was born and raised. Played my high school hockey up there, and then went on to the USHL, to the Lincoln Stars, and went and played college hockey D1 up in University of Alaska Anchorage for a few years before I turned pro over to Europe. And once here in Europe, after a few years, you meet a girl over here, and sometimes you just never get back to the States. So that's how it was. I married my wife. She's from Sweden, and just started getting into coaching back in around 2008 over here. And this whole time, just kind of an evolution of coaching on where I started and then how where I am at today, actually. And the coaching world has been fantastic for me, a lot better than my playing days, actually. So I can't complain there. But the coaching that's taken me from Sweden to Norway, down to Switzerland, all over here. And then I just got here to Switzerland after 5 years in Russia, which was an experience in itself. And actually miss a lot from being there, but definitely not the lifestyle.
Yeah. Now, Ted, I've been a follower of your work for quite some time on social media, and I've attended some of the work you've done virtually at various coaching seminars. And I know you have a strong foothold in the neuroscience, the whole learning and how athletes learn. And I think you've done some academic work in neuroscience recently. And you're doing some things, I believe, with coaches around this area. Tell us a little bit about that before we kind of jump in, just to give the listeners and watchers some background on that side of your work.
Well, like I mentioned, like when I first started coaching, I think we all do what we did when we played, and we learned from our prior coaches, and then we kind of just repeat that area. And there was a few years ago back in Norway, and I was doing some camps of my own with my company and stuff, and kind of had one of those moral dilemmas where it's like, I got all these kids always coming, and they were going to be with me for maybe a couple of weeks here and there. And what's actually going to happen over the next, 9 months that they're going to be with their clubs? And how is that continual learning actually, keep going for them? And when I got to Russia, I decided to go back to school, and I started studying the neuroscience because, when you start looking at everything else, it's so much that the body can actually do. And no matter how much we teach the skating, the stick handling, and everything else, if we're not connecting to brain to anything, then we're really not going to, enhance the player's ability to actually play. So when we're looking into that realm, I believe like the hockey IQ part of it is really where separates everybody from who they are and what's behind them. And it just got me into actually studying the brain and actually what goes on upstairs. And then how do you connect that to the players? And then eventually, how do you connect that to the environment that you're on the ice to make everything worthwhile so they can take it with them and they can continue to learn as they progress? And actually, it gives them a few more tools for themselves, no matter what coach that they come in contact with. They'll be able to actually connect different things if they have a good educator to start with.
Excellent. That's a great segue into where we're going to go on our conversation, because as you and I chatted, we're going to the focus of this episode is now going to be tying in the theories and frameworks and the simplified versions of that we got from Stu and Ed and Rob Gray. And we're going to kind of bring that now out for coaches and kind of give them a little bit of a visual and a little bit of a more simplified version, and break down the language on how that brain, that learning, that, dare I say, the neuroscience side of the things from your work in academia. But now, what does that mean for us coaches on how we design practices, design the environment, and the impact all of that has on enhancing learning. So that's the path we're going to go down, and I know our coach is going to love the things you have to say. So I'm going to open up with sort of probably the simplest question that we might discuss here, but I've asked it of all three of our guests so far. So I have to start off with this one with you. How do you define, and we'll talk hockey specifically now, how do you define skill, and do you differentiate skill from technique?
100%. There's a difference. No, but technique is, the simplest way to put it is technique is something you're going to find in a textbook. It's something that I can draw on. I'm going to be able to show you exactly what you should look like. And then we're going to practice that until you can actually do that. And too many people, when we look at that, the best and the easiest one to do that on is skating, because you've seen so many different ways on, 45 degrees out when you stride, you should be at 90 degrees when you bend, your forward lean should be so and so, your knees over your toe, knees over the toes, all this. And if you think about all that jargon that you're just hearing right there, and when you go to any place they're teaching skating, they're throwing that at the kids. Now, I can't think of if my leg is going at 45 degrees, like when I'm striding. I don't know. I just know it's pushing out. I know I don't want to be pushing back, but I'm pushing out. So how do I do a different cue on that? And I think when you're talking with Stu and Rob and everybody else, they're talking about constraints. Well, the biggest constraint is the individual himself. So if we have a template on a technique on how I'm going to skate, well, that's going to fit one person. And it's going to fit them perfectly. But then I got 10 other kids that are out there as well that all have different body constraints. They're all limitations somewhere, right? So what's the best way that we can do that? So you're going to be looking at more involved in a principal action, actually, because if I take the best skaters in the game today, they all skate differently. So which one's right? Which is the right technique? Because you see, before you had the perfect technique, I guess it would have been like, say, Paul Coffey or Sergei Fedorov, as we were getting in the 90s and 80s. Yep. But then all of a sudden that changed, and all of a sudden everybody wants to skate like, Connor McDavid. So now everybody wants to try to teach it that way, but not every kid can skate that way. So I think, and what happens there is that when we're teaching a technique, I'm sorry to get off a little bit there, but when we're teaching a technique, yep, you're really overloading the brain. So what's the player actually thinking about? He's thinking about actually how to move his limbs. He's thinking about what actions he's supposed to do. And that's not necessarily always for himself or herself. It's more about what the coach is trying to give me. So they're trying to please. So they're trying to fit themselves into a box that the coach wants so they can get praise out of it. But as you've probably seen before, is you see a kid do this very well in a practice, the second he gets to the game, it's gone because he's not thinking about it anymore. Or you have the different side of it. If I take like some kind of stick handling, if you watch on Instagram or any of these other places, you got cones, you got tires, you got pucks everywhere, and there's stick handling around them, and they're learning new moves. Well, what does the kid want to do when he gets to the game? He wants to use that move, right? So something he just learned he wants to use because it's right up in the forefront of his brain. So he will try to find any kind of situation out there that he can use to fit that in there. But 99% of the time, it's going to turn out a turnover. It's going to be the wrong decision at the wrong time. But he doesn't understand that because he just did a whole week of that being perfect at it and feeling comfortable. So that's technique in my thing. Technique is more about the coach trying to fit something where the kid's going to be able to get the best he can out of it, but not necessarily fit in it. Where skill is the application of technique. Skill is the area where you're going to have to take everything else around you from the environment, all the different perception that's coming in. Where's the D's? Where's the gap? Where are my teammates? Where's the space? What's the situation? All that plays in part into what the skill is, and that the skill is to be able to solve that problem for you. Sorry, that was a little bit long-winded, eh?
Oh, I love it. I love it. You're going right down the path I want to go. Thank you. So I love that distinction. I think that was a very clear and very articulated distinction of the two for any coach that would be listening. So let me push the envelope here a little bit. can a player, is it even possible as a coach that I can make a player skilled, or we now hear skillful, make them skillful or make them skilled in my practice environment if all I'm doing are drills in isolation, around cones, around circles? In other words, what you just described as we're now working on technique, or what Rob Gray, when we talked to Rob, he talked about that one ideal solution, and how you just highlighted that you can't go down that path because not every kid is the same. Can we as coaches make them skilled, make them skillful in a practice environment that is only isolated?
I think that's like a double-sided question, because I mean, if we're looking at, like, I work with players that are in the pro leagues and the top juniors, right? So we have a lot of practices that sometimes we'll have the one-on-one, right? So I believe at times I can use the ISO for that for sure, but there's a but there. When I'm doing it in ISO, I'm actually working on their habits from different areas. So I understand that's my studying of the player, understanding where he wants to be, what he wants to do, yet sometimes he's not getting the solutions, or sometimes you see a hiccup in the quote unquote technique, right? So I can actually work on him in ISO to try to iron things out, but I don't want to take him so far out of ISO where it's not even relative to the game anymore.
Right.
So this is where I think you can get that little bit more of a connector inside there. But at the same time, though, is like when we're ironing them out, there's so many questions going back and forth. There's so much video as well that's going on the ice. So it's not necessarily like rep after rep after rep, because you have to have, like, inside the brain, we have like the BDNF molecule that's up there that we actually generate. And then we want to be able to slow down the heart rate and everything else. So we don't want to be too high, so we can actually learn and actually understand what we're learning, that can actually settle inside the brain.
Okay.
So what happens there is that you can do a few reps, but then you got to be able to talk it out. They got to be able to see it. So you can be neurologically seeing it, piecing that parts together in the brain about what they're doing. And I think the biggest thing that we don't talk to players about when we're doing ISO is, how do you feel? Usually it's the coach directing that, right? So it's like, you're supposed to, instead of being, well, how did that feel? Because if it doesn't feel right for the player, then there's no use to keep going down that road. But if now a player tells me, well, it doesn't feel right. Okay, so now that doesn't feel right. So what doesn't feel right of it? Your leg, your arm, the way you're moving. How is it? So that I can be able to actually maybe help manipulate that in a different way. But while you're inside there, that personal connection is so important. Now, on the flip side, when I said but before, the flip side of it is that when I'm taking kids into this, we don't have tons of game tape. They don't really have habits yet, right? Especially at the younger levels. So they're kind of like fresh. They're sponges in this game as it is. So why would I try to make them a robot already? So, kids, most kids, just as far as how you have it with families, they want to please the adult in the room, right? They're pleasure seekers, right? So if I tell the kid that you're going to do this and do this and do this, he's going to do it because he wants to honor me in that sense. He wants to please me by showing me that he does a good job. But if I can never ask him questions, if I never get him into that feeling, I don't know what he's feeling out there. And I always goes back to a great little interaction I had with my son. I don't coach him. I've tried. It doesn't work. But this was back in Russia. And in Russia, parents, we can't watch practices. They're not allowed.
Right.
But because I was a coach in the system and they're practicing at our training facility, I just, snuck in and watched. And he's, at that time, was only the second year playing hockey. So he's about 6 years old at that time. And they're playing a 2-on-2 game. I'm just watching. I'm writing stuff down on my phone, and he's doing open hips. He's stopping on one leg. He's protecting the puck. He's doing all this stuff, which kind of shocked me a little bit because I've never seen it from him before. So a couple of days later, I brought him to the rink with me, and I threw some cones on the ice. I said, okay, let's do the open hip here. Boom. on his face. Let's do the one stop. Boom, down on his butt. Now I try to do it. I'm like, all right, hey, bud, you got to keep your right leg open. You got to keep, open yourself up, glide on the heel. Couldn't do it. All of a sudden, his left leg is dragging, or it turns in, or it turns out. And then that night he had practiced again. They're playing again, and he magically has it again. So to me, it was kind of like a little bit of an eye opener as well, as saying like, well, you know what, the kids, they already push themselves because they don't want to lose. There's always that competition level, right? So they're going to organize their body in any way, shape, or form to, one, protect the puck, and two, to evade the opposition. So what he was doing naturally was just instinct. Now, as a coach, this is something you got to be able to jump on at that moment and be like, there you go, there it is. That was good. Don't try to get into the details of what he did, because I don't think he really knew what he did. He just organized his body in a way that was just going to keep the puck away from the opponent. So this is where there's that open part that goes into there, where when they're young, we have to be able to have that environment that just elicits all these different kind of moves that we see that the big NHL pros do. But little kids can do it as well. But we can't teach it in a step-by-step process, because some will get it, but the majority won't. And unfortunately, we don't know like the numbers are, but the majority that don't, they end up quitting later on, right? Because they get frustrated. It's not fun anymore. Yeah. But then we don't have the numbers that tell us, well, how many of those kids could have been players compared to the ones that we, quote unquote, were our talent kids at the youngest levels.
There's a lot to unpack there, Ted. We probably could stop right here, because that statement you made about, I took him out of the game-like activity, put him in isolation, and he couldn't do it, but in the game-like he could and was learning to do it, because as you put it, he was learning to organize his own body in that event. That's almost a full stop right there. That's almost like, there you go, coaches. Kids can learn, kids can develop, kids can be skillful inside of activities that are representative of the game, and we don't need to be always pushing and pushing and pushing. That I need to teach them first in isolation just to get them to play the game.
But then again, you also have to take in the context too, is that I know my son very well. I hope I do. But both my kids are very creative, right? They have a very creative mindset, and they can draw, they can think of different things, they can have all this, which, other kids that are more analytical, they might not be that same way, where it comes out. But this is where the coach has to get to understand who his players are, right? Because I could actually get onto the ice with all of our, the pros and the juniors. We got over 70 some players. And you can sit there with all of them and be able to pick out who's this, who's that, who needs a little bit more of a step-by-step, who just needs a concept, right? But I think this is our job as a coach, just like a teacher in school. You got to get to know your players. And it's a cop-out saying, I don't have time. And I think that's the first step to everything, is just actually understanding who you're working with and which ways they learn the best.
Gotcha. Now, when you were describing, when you initially started to kind of provide an answer for that question, where I said, can we get skillful purely in isolation? And you started talking about the pros that you work with, right? And I was happy that you made the distinction that these are already skillful players, and you're bringing them into isolation to work on things that are habits for them, but you might need to tweak, right? Mm-hmm. But you also made a comment that, or it sounded like this, that when you're doing that work, it's not necessarily what I call bare metal isolation. Yeah, you're working one-on-one, but you made it sound like the thing you're working on it in a way where, either by location on the ice or the setup and constraints of the activity, still are somewhat representing the game. So you 100%. Might be, there might be a hitch in a habit of catching rims. Well, you're doing that activity in the area of the ice where that player has to catch rims more often than not. So you're probably not out in the neutral zone at the red line on straight boards doing rim work, right? Speak to that a little bit, because I think there are a lot of coaches who still believe that there is value to what I call isolation. But I'd like you to address how, if we're going to do isolation, how we can improve the isolation.
Right. So like when you go out to watch a practice and you're seeing stations, or you're seeing a private trainer, whatever you want to call it, what are the players usually doing? They're standing still, correct? They start in line, and then they all move through a predetermined route, always. So it's there's the old repetition, there's the old 10,000 hours. Keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. You're going to get good at it. There's your mastery. But the problem with that is that how many times you can actually be in that situation where you're going in a straight line, where you're doing exactly the same move over and over. You're not. So to go back to my first example, it was with a player named Gregory Hofmann. He played a little bit with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now he's back over here. And he's a left-handed shot, and all he wants to do is shoot off his right leg over and over and over again. And in the zone, he's a passer-buyer. Like, he's always moving, like gliding and moving. He's never standing still, and he's never trying, like, in an area. He's just trying to be a ghost and then pop into different situations. But the problem is that when he does receive the pass, what he likes to do is take that extra stick handle no matter where that pass is, and he wants to let it go from his right, which gives everybody time, space, everything depletes, and the goaltender gets ready. So for him, for example, when we're doing these kind of things, it's like, okay, let's remap how you actually go around the zone. Like, where's the puck at? Where are you starting at? Let's get you in those movements, because you're always going to do it. We're not going to change your game and say, don't move, because they're going to take away so much else. So let's get you in these movements. Now let's put you in different areas. And I'm going to be making passes to him, but they're not going to be tape to tape. It's like, it's ISO, but I'm still trying to give it a little bit of a game-like feel, like, okay, how are you going to get your body into catching that pass and let it rip? How are you going to be able to catch it while keeping your feet moving and shooting at the same time off your left leg? How are we going to get it so that when we catch that pass, we're not going to be looking for power or anything else. We're going to be looking for quickness getting off the blade, just get it towards the net as quick as possible. And the biggest point to all that is that it's always not about what happens when the puck touches his stick or when it leaves it. It's usually, how does he organize himself beforehand? So those are, like, when we're looking at the isolations on that sense, we're looking at the steps before, not the steps during or after. It's always before, because I don't organize, I don't time it, I don't get in the right area, I don't push my top hand out to be able to, if that puck is in near. If I'm not doing that, well, then I got to do what I naturally always do: catch it, stick handle, shoot. Which, once again, it takes away time and everything else. So in these kind of isolation things, it's more about pre-mapping, like what he likes to do, and this is over game after game after game, and just you're finding pieces that mesh together. And that's usually like the prime before we get out onto the ice on a one-on-one. So he sees what he does in the game, and then him understanding and being able to trust me, like, okay, this is what you want to do. We're going to continue keeping this because we're not going to change you. But what we're going to do is we're going to work on these different areas here about how you catch it, how you release it, how you time it, all these different little. So it's not a pure isolation. It's like more of a hybrid in a sense.
Right. Yeah. Perfect. So now, from the youth coach perspective, where I don't have that luxury of taking an athlete on the ice one-on-one, and I now have 15 hockey players, and I need to address skill development. I've got a team. Every practice I have is a team. Yep. And I get 2 1-hour practices a week, or 3 1-hour practices, or maybe only 1 1-hour practice a week. And I'm that coach now, and I want to improve the skillfulness and the skill development quality of my players and my team. Let's go down that path now. Because I'm going to guess that's now going to start looking a lot different than the one-on-one work that you do, right? So from that perspective, coaching youth teams, U13, U12, U14, what would you say is the first priority that a coach needs to consider when it comes to how they design their practices to ensure skill development. So no matter what else I'm working on, I might be coaching a U15 AAA team, and today it's a forecheck day. So we might be doing some team play, some team tactic type of stuff. But I never, ever want to forget about, even inside of that, I want my players to be skillful, even if it's not a skill day. Is there one consideration that you think a coach needs to always put right out in front about when you design your practices? Here's your biggest consideration.
But that's the thing. That was where I was going to cut you off there, and I think this is also a problem within our society of coaching and the way we think. What's the difference between a skill practice and a team practice? Why do we have to separate the two?
Yeah, great question. And I threw it out there just for the sake of the coaches, because a lot of the coaches will think that way, right?
Right. But I mean, when I'm looking at everything, in every shape and form that we work on, why, like I always ask the coaches here, and then we try to challenge everybody. It's like, well, what's the difference? See, I think this is the perception part where we're thinking is like, it's like, okay, well, skill practice is, because what you see all over social media now, it's stations and it's all the shit that you can find that you can throw onto the ice, and we're going to do stuff. And then we're going to go into team practice, and team practice is going to be about our tactic, about our forecheck, about our breakout, and it's going to be all separate, isolated events. But then I asked, the question is more about, then, aren't these two connected in all shape and form? I mean, to do a breakout, don't we have to have skillful players? Do we not need to know how to skate, how to receive passes, how to perceive, how to work with teammates? Well, if that's the case, then why are we breaking down our skill development into singular people with always using just the puck by themselves? So if we break these two in separate pieces, I think that's the biggest disconnect we have in our sport, is that we think that skill development is cones, power edge, pro, whatever you can find and throw onto the ice, the kitchen sink, and that's individual. And then team practice is like what you mentioned before. That's our team. That's what we have. But I beg to argue that I believe it's both intertwined, and then we have to be able to use both. So how would I do that at the young levels? I think it's the same way I do it with their pros and everything else. I gave you an example of a one-off where you're working one-on-one, where I said that where the ISO can take place. But then when we do our skill practices, we usually have all of our forwards on the ice, 12 forwards, 14 forwards, or we'll have all of our D. Those are our skill practices. Well, how are we working on that? Well, we're working in tandems with our Ds, and we're working in threes with our forwards. Why? Because we got to find space and time. We got to understand how fast somebody else is going. How do we pass? What's my touch on the pass? And only that I can only do that if I have another teammate that's actually moving. Well, how does that fit into the game? Well, that's in every single breakout. That's on every single zone entry, every single triangle that we're trying to form on the ice. So if I look at it from that concept, isn't it much easier to break down a quote unquote skill practice for the young kids and making different stations on different areas? Case in point, we were looking for a head of youth development here back in November and December. And like I said, I don't really go out with my kid much, but we had this guy come out, and he was going to come out with the under 11s. And they had a 7-station practice. Well, one of the stations was the old 1980s. You stand on the blue line, I stand on the red line, and we'll pass for 15 minutes. Okay? Feet facing each other, sideways, backhand, all that stuff. 15 minutes. Mind you that all the kids on the team, they're separated in different colors based on what their abilities are on the ice. So you got the top kids in a different color, and you got the lower kids in a different color. So anyway, we had this practice this one week, and yeah, it was 15 minutes of them doing it, all the same levels, doing the same thing. I come out the second week with another guy that we're interviewing, same practice. Now I go to the game on a Sunday with my son. My wife and I are sitting up there watching. What do you think you saw in a 4-on-4 cross ice game? You saw whenever our team wanted to make a pass, they stopped skating. When the kids are ready to receive the pass, what do? They stop skating. And the other kids who were, if you were to take it into skill-wise, were not even close to our team, they destroyed them. Why? Because it was just chaotic out there, and every time our kids came, they just kind of like a swarm of bees got on them, took the puck, and they went the other way. These are 9 and 10-year-olds, right? So I brought that back up to the coaches here, and I was like, okay, let's say that drill that you guys wanted to do, that's good for your lowest end kids that are just trying to learn. They're just there. So what can we do to enhance it for group A, B, and C though? So now all of a sudden we're like, okay, the first thing that we need to do, like this is where you as a coach, you're watching games, and you're seeing things. First thing we need to do is that we need to have movement. So they got to read each other. So a simple drill, 4 cones, 3 players. I make a pass, I move to another cone. So they start moving. Next one, put a guy into the middle. So now he's got to take away an option. So somebody's got to move before the puck goes. Now all of a sudden you take away the cones. Now you got them just in an area trying to have it, trying to move, trying to keep that puck, basically pig in the middle. But the kids had so much fun. You see this go over a few weeks, and all of a sudden you start watching the game, and all of a sudden it just naturally translates into it. But that practice, I'll never forget. That practice, there was 7 stations. There was that one in the mid zone. Then we had another angling drill. These were from 9 and 10-year-olds. We had another angling drill, but the puck started on the boards. So it started from a scrum. Why? 80% of the game is on the boards. So it started from a scrum, and then they come out, they win it. They got to get an angle. They make a pass up, and then they got to get an angle to go. Then they had 2 games where it was just, one was a 3-on-3, no coach, nobody there, just play. And they had another Gates game where they were trying to go and make sure, keep it on that passing theme. To score the goal, they had to make the pass through the tires. So they always had to move. So it's like, what for us, that was their biggest thing. It wasn't necessarily the skating, but skating's always involved. But ours was, what's our concept right now? Our biggest concept is we got to get players moving with the puck, finding space and finding time. So that whole practice for the next month was always going to be on that possession based on skill. So how do we keep the puck? How do we support our teammates, and how do we protect it? And this was just a very simple way to actually just maneuver our practices where nothing ever looked the same. It always changed. So the kids never got bored. And you never saw, that was the one great thing during these next couple of weeks that we watched these practices. Not one kid ever went off the ice to actually sit and take a break because they were always involved. It never got boring.
Are we talking, and before we started this session, you and I talked about the language that goes around some of these, I call them the new approaches, although they've been around for a long time.
Yeah.
The non-traditional approaches of ecological dynamics that Stu helped clarify for us, and skill acquisition and perception and action coupling that Rob talked about. So we've got all these academic, scientific type terms. I'm going to throw one out here because it sounds like where you're going with this is you're just simply talking about making things in the practice environment represent the elements from the real game.
100%.
Be representative when we design practices. So you talked about those little kids standing still, blue line and red line, for 15 minutes passing the puck back and forth, which doesn't represent the game of hockey. So what can we do to make things represent the game of hockey? Now, my question for you, as a player development expert specialist, when we talk about making things representative of the game, does it need to be exact, or can it just be similar?
It has to be similar. I don't think you can exactly do it because the game is a snowflake. it changes so much, right? And if you're talking exact where, okay, our nets are going to be at the exact same place and all this kind of thing, so you have the geographical areas and stuff like that. Okay, well, now let's start looking at it to the sense where, are we calling the players dumb? I mean, are we saying that if we move a net here, that they're not going to understand that they have to shoot where the net is during a game? I mean, that's where we're getting at, right? So I think it has to have some kind of similarities. You don't want to take you don't want to take everything out of the game and make something that doesn't represent it. But what are you trying to work on, and how would you see it being fit inside of the game? And then put something together for it. I mean, the similarities, like I said before, competition is always going to be inside of a kid. And that's when they're babies. You see that the sandboxes, when you take your kid out there to the park, they find that one little shovel. Two little kids that are 2 years old are going to fight over that shovel. So competition is naturally there. I think we breed it out of them because we isolate things for too long. We take that competition out and then we try to reintroduce it when they hit that 15, 16-year-old. No, the competition's there, so let's always make it a competition within practice as well. Because there, you as a coach, if you're really in tune with what you're trying to see, you're going to see kids protect the puck. You're going to see kids talk. You're going to see kids actually try to find space and support one another. And these are the things that as a coach you can grasp onto and make it relevant to them. And the old verbiage is, well, you have to learn to skate before you can play. Well, is that really true? Because I always go to that thing where it's like, to play the game, we have to skate. It's just like to live, you have to breathe, right? Well, how many people breathe wrong? We have breathing classes now, right? So there's different ways we can breathe. We can box breathe. We can do everything to have it. But I can breathe. Right? So kids are going to be able to skate, and they're going to skate at their different levels and all that kind of stuff. But the more I can put them inside of situations, the better I'm going to be able to see out what are their deficiencies. Right? This is where you become in tune. Now, if I'm starting to see a deficiency that's really hampering a player, I can take that player out per se and do a quick ISO with them. Or I can make another station in a future practice that's going to maybe, look at that. But if I see one deficiency in one player out of 50, like you said, I'm pretty sure I'm going to see that same deficiency in a few other players, right? So I can change my practices up a little bit to actually address those issues with certain players, but not put them inside of a box, but just actually work on their deficiencies to make them a little bit better, a little bit more efficient on the ice, and then pop them back into something that they're going to be able to, use it right away so they understand the transfer effect. And I think that's the part that we always misunderstand in our game, is that we look at kids as dumb. We don't really grasp the intelligence that kids have. We can introduce something to them and they'll grasp it right away. It's like languages. The younger they are, they're like sponges. They'll just suck it up and they'll start speaking. Me and you, as we get older, languages become very, very difficult. And it's the same thing that we're looking at when we have kids on the ice. Don't dumb it down. Bring it up to them. Challenge them. And see where they, quote unquote, fail. And then you as a coach, now you can address those little areas quickly, get them back up to speed, and then push them right back into that area that you want them to be in.
Gotcha. Now, for the coach, this was something that came out in the previous episodes. Stu and Ed, I believe, both raised this. We kind of got talking about using the environment, right? And letting the environment help drive the learning. But then when you, as a coach, when you start to notice that there's struggles within the activity you're doing, rather than decomposing it down to isolation all the time, can you just simplify it so that it still remains game-like, representative, challenging, competitive, decision-based? I want to talk a little bit about that and sort of how you use that in your day-to-day, where you might be looking at an activity with athletes in it that you thought might have been a great learning activity, and you had all kinds of intention, and then when you put them in it, you kind of go, ooh, not working. But rather than just rip it all apart and say, okay, one-on-one, what can you
No,
do to go, let me just, you know,
you never do that. Like you've come up with a activity, we call it, instead of a drill, but we'll call it an activity where you have the decisions, you have consequences for actions that are out there. So you have all that already built in. The question is you as a coach that's watching it, who are you to break it down? That's my biggest question. Yeah, I'm the authority figure on the ice, but who am I to break it down? Because I don't know what's actually hindering them. I don't know what's making it difficult unless I start asking them questions. They're the ones that are going to give me the feedback that I need to know. And then I'll be able to take out a piece, or through their areas where they're having the hindrances by questioning questioning them all the time and actually listening to their answers. Now I actually might be able to guide them towards how to make it successful without even touching it.
interesting.
And you've been around kids. They like to talk. And I mean, if we're talking like young kids, like the 12s or the 11, 10-year-olds, they'll give you honest feedback right away. It's the older guys that are a little bit, stubborn in that sense, where they don't want to give you the feedback. Then you got to press them even more. So I think it's actually a little bit easier with younger kids to actually get that feedback about what's tough, what makes it, not successful in that sense, where we're not seeing what we want to be able to see. They'll give it to you as long as you're honest and you're open. And with the older kids, it's more of like you're trying to pull teeth a little bit because they're not used to it. So now all of a sudden, you have to sit there and, sometimes those pauses are long, 30 seconds, almost a minute, till you start getting answers. But when you start getting answers, they understand, like, okay, you're trying to empower me, right? You actually really want my feedback on this. And then you can actually look at it, like you say, you can simplify it down a little bit. You can take out a rule, you can put a rule in. You can change the dynamics of the environment just a little bit to make it a little bit more successful, and then quickly push it back to being tough again, quote unquote tough, how it started. But I think it does the learner a disservice if we actually go in there and just break it down to ISO and then try to build it back up. I think it does a learner more, and we empower the kids a lot more when we sit there and we ask them questions about it. But this takes time, and I know that it's difficult when in Canada and everywhere else at the younger levels we have volunteer coaches. But this is where education is so vital, because it's just like in school. I always compare hockey to school. We would never send our kid to somebody that doesn't have the education in school, right? There would be no, even though it's a free school, public school, we would never send our kid to a person that wasn't educated. And so when we have volunteer coaches that do coaching courses and everything else, these are the areas that need to be spoken about. How do you communicate with the kids? Because they will give you that information. And you as a coach who've been an ex-player or an ex-coach that dropped down, or just a really passionate parent, you can find solutions to it then. It's a lot harder to be a parent that's going to be just breaking it down to ISO and be like, okay, just do forward stride. Okay, just do this because Brian told me so. This is what it should look like, But all parents, they can all communicate because they usually have kids. So they all understand that. But I think that's the biggest part, is before we break down everything and throw it out the window and go into isolation, the biggest part for me is let's speak to the players. Let's find out why the success rate's not there. What's the hindrance? Let's work through this possibly, and let's go back out and try it again.
One of the other areas sort of connected to that, Ted, that we see as well, is that we don't even start with an environment where we as coaches look at it and then break it down. Quite often we just start with a broken down version. And I don't mean broken down, but
No.
I want my players to be able to do this. Well, before I ever get there, I must teach them this, instead of, like you say, just let them get there. Put them there, like your son's environment. Do I need to teach heel to heel inside edge? Or can I put them where they can organize themselves and figure it out and then go, they got it. I don't need to teach it. So often we jump in as coaches to teach. It's like there's a passion. I want to teach. I need to teach. But what I'm hearing from you is we can put them in these activities and they can figure things out. They can organize themselves. And then our job is to question and interact with them to determine where we now have to get involved.
Well, I mean, we know what we want to teach in a sense, right? I hope. And I mean, every age level has different things that kids need to grasp and everything as they bump up through the chain. So we should know what we want to teach. So that shouldn't be, that far out there from us that we can just be able to grab it. But how do I create that environment for them to actually, grasp the concepts? And this is where, nobody ever says, I think that's sometimes where it gets lost in this constraints-based and, echo and all this kind of stuff where it's like, this is the only way and there's no other way. We have a very different sport compared to other sports. I was just speaking because my son plays baseball and we were just talking about this week in our coaches meeting at work. Baseball is the one sport that's almost always game-like. No matter how you break it down, take away the tee when you're practicing hitting and you're practicing fielding and you're doing all that kind of stuff. I can never hit the ball the same way twice to my infielders. I can never make that pop fly to my outfielders perfect every time. No, they're always going to have to judge. Do I have to run back? Do I have to run forward? It's always judging and going. So baseball to me is the one sport that's almost always game-like from training to game. When you're taking batting practice, the ball's not always going to be right down the middle unless you're using the jugs machine. But when you have live pitching, and usually when dads go out there, you got coaches, you got a team that doesn't have much money, you can't afford it. It's live pitching. So the kids are constantly always learning how to read the ball. Is it a strike? Is it high? Is it low? Where's it coming at? So why can't we do that in hockey? Sure, we have a little bit of a different sport because we got skate. Our arms, we have a stick. But then I asked the question, okay, we have a stick. Great. So then why is it when I go to a lot of rinks and you see little kids skating, they take the sticks and throw them in the corners? And then you got to go and do the forward stride without a stick. You got to learn how to do this other stuff with a stick. Without a stick, sorry. So you do that for 15 minutes. Then all of a sudden we're going to teach skating now. No, go grab your stick and we're going to do the same thing again with the stick. Well, why the hell did we start without a stick? They're going to skate with the stick anyway, so we're wasting time. And now we're going to do it again, so you're going to go through it a third time with the puck. Why not put the puck on their stick right away? If you want to teach skating in an ISO set situation, put a puck on their stick. You're going to see how they're going to organize themselves. And if they can skate with a puck, they can definitely skate without a puck. So now you're going to hammer everything and all your teaching points into one movement, where instead of wasting 30 or 40 minutes, you're hammering this down to 15 minutes or 10 minutes, right? So it's like you said before, we can't break it all the way down, but we can break it down to certain areas and then build it back up quick. But you have to be smart with how you're going to do that.
So how do you answer, what's your answer to this coach? Because this coach exists. If I put their stick in the hand, and especially if I put a puck on that stick, their skating breaks down so miserably that they're not learning how to skate.
Okay. Teach them. I mean, that's your job. His skating, yeah, sure, his skating breaks down so miserably that it is. But then I asked the question is like, okay, if his skating breaks down with a puck, but you teach him without a puck, so his skating's perfect, but then it breaks down with a puck. So what's his natural skating then? That's where what's artificial and what's real, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So if I go without a puck and he can skate like the wind and he can do all this stuff, Well, is that natural? Is that going to transfer into the game? Because he's not going to skate in a straight line during the game. He's going to skate side to side. He's going to be doing different things. He's going to have to organize his body to get into space and time. So why not put the puck on his stick right away and see what he naturally will do? And now you, as the educator, get in there and teach it. Here's the hard part. They're not accustomed to that. They're not educated enough to actually look at that person as an individual and fix what is wrong.
This starts to get really close to something that came up in all three of the previous episodes, where Stu and Ed and Rob talked about when you start learning things, and I use in isolation, and I don't mean in isolation in a bad way, right? Because we've had a good conversation here, and you've highlighted that there's room for both. There's a good way to do isolation, and there's maybe not so good a way. But in all three episodes, they both made the comment about that when you learn something outside of, I'll say, the context of the game, like skating without a puck, and then you have to do it in the context of the game, all three of them said you have to relearn it again. And that was their argument for, if we pull everything out in isolation and go there, it looks great. The stride is great. Oh, beautiful skating. Now do it with a puck. Oh, I can't, coach. Now I have a puck. Well, all that isolated teaching has to be relearned again. That's what I'm hearing here is that nice little sort of soft argument for the value of getting inside of what's the reality of the game and what are the techniques, the skills, the abilities they need in the reality of the game. And maybe that's how we need to drive our practice design and our teaching.
Right. And that's what I just mentioned, right? So if you went without a stick, come on, you see coaches do that today still at the youngest levels. Sticks out. You see the figure skating coach that comes out, stick out. Let's work on our edges. Let's work on this. Let's work on that. And then you put the stick in, then you put the puck in, and then your session's over. And that was a great session because we saw improvement, right? But in essence, we taught the same damn thing for 1 hour. So it's a very easy way for the coach to have a good hour. It's done. But then, like what Stu and everybody else is saying, like I'd rather tackle the big elephant right away. And like, okay, put the puck on your stick. Let's work on this and let's see where you're at. Now what can I jump next to, right? And when you're looking at it, it's the same thing like when we look at passing. If I stand, me and you right now, we're just passing back and forth. What are the teaching principles there? Right? What's the kid learning? Okay, yeah, he's learning to push and pull. Great. He's learning how to receive. Great. But what isn't he learning? Timing, distance, strength of the pass, those different little nuances that we actually need when the game comes. And this is where, if we go back to the start of the thing where you're talking about technique, I want to throw that whole word technique out and just look at it as principle based. There's principles for everything, right? So, I mean, when I'm skating, what's the principle? Okay, my knees are over my toes, but I think that's usually natural. You don't have to sit there and tell the kid you need to bend at the ankles because he doesn't know what that means. Bend at the ankles. You need to get your ass down. He sits down. Like there's so many different cues there that kids don't understand. And to be quite frank with you, I think a lot of adults don't understand them when you give them these cues as well, right? Butt down. Well, what does butt down mean? Well, if I sit my butt down, am I doing like a squat? Now my actual knees are behind my toes, because that's how some guys go, right? Or did you really want my knees in front of my toes? But how am I supposed to flex my ankles? Oh, I can't do that. But I always like when we teach the skating part, it's always fun with the kids. It's always like, hey guys, you see the kids that sit like this and their asses up in the air. And I always bring them down. And I go, hey guys, how do you guys play PlayStation at home? And instantly they get down there. I'm like, oh, but you're not sitting there like this, so you can't see the TV then. They're like, no, that looks stupid. we sit on the couch and we sit like this. We're kind of like lean forward a little bit. I'm like, whoa, go! You guys are in the hockey position now. You guys are in the skating position. So, how does it relate to them?
Yeah.
So I think that's where we have to be able to get to is like, how do we relate it to them? And then how do we relate the practice to the game? It has to be relatable every way possible. And I think the earlier we get it, and that's the part where you're going to hear the pushback from people about isolation. But I always bring it back to when we were just up in Sweden. Now we have, I don't know how it is in Canada, but here in Switzerland, and it was in Russia, you go from August to the end of April, right? That's a long season. You have a lot of practices. So just for our junior team, we had 245 practices this season, 45 games. All right. Does all those 245, does every single practice need to be game-like? Or can you break things up once in a while and change things on things you really think you need to work on? And partial ISO and different areas where you can hammer in a quick point and then put it back inside of a game, so you can do like interweaving a little bit like that, right? So I can take, here's my little bit of an ISO, here's how I might use an individual tactic, for example, right? Here's my little ISO in a station, and my next station that kid goes to, he's got to use it right away. And now if that next station is, say, quote unquote, a game, instead of having the points as far as how many goals do we score, can we have it to the sense where you attempted the move that you just learned, or you attempted that thing we just had? There's your point. Like different things. So how do we reward them into these different areas? And when you're looking at such a long season, it's like, how do you go back and forth between the different philosophies? Because the tried and true, it produced a lot of great players throughout the years. We can't deny that. But there is a better way as well, which we're talking about now. But can you marry them a little bit from time to time in the season to break up the monotony sometimes, and actually give different kind of feedbacks and different kind of practice environments for these kids to learn?
Ted, again, going back to the youth coach, and this will be a tough one, because as you know, in Canada and the US and even in Europe, youth coaches don't have 245 practices. The youth coach who practices 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week, can you help them kind of understand, look, if you're in this category, if you're a coach with 1 hour practice a week, you probably should be leaning more towards keeping your practices very representative, game-like, competitive, challenging, lots of activity, lots of fun. And you probably, as a coach, shouldn't be looking for a hybrid and a balance until you hit 3 1 hour practices a week or 4. Like, where would you be around that, dare I call it, a formula?
But when you're looking at, because I don't know what the numbers are there. Obviously, the numbers in Canada, you guys have a lot more players registered. A lot more. You have a lot more of everything compared to what we have here in Switzerland. We don't have many. So we have a lot of practice time, even for our youth kids as well. Just because there aren't so many players, so we have to take care of everyone. So every kid is very valuable to make sure that we try to keep pushing them through the pipeline and they stay involved in the game. With that said, when you're looking at the kids that have like the 1 hour practices, the normal coach there, how many kids are you dealing with on the ice usually?
Yeah, you'd have about 15 kids, or in that environment. So I'll paint the picture for you.
Yeah.
Here in our branch around the Ottawa region, we have recreational or house league hockey, then up into like early tier competitive and right up to AAA. Okay. At the recreational level, you'd be getting 1 hour practice a week, maybe 1 hour practice every 10 days. At the other extreme, at the AAA levels, U13, 14, 15, 16, you would probably be in the neighborhood of 3, 1.5, or 2 hour practices a week. So okay. that coach at the recreational level, which is the bulk of our coaches, And that's the bulk of coaches in Canada. I have one 50-minute, 60-minute practice every week or 10 days.
Wow.
Do I have time to be worried about isolation?
No, I think you need to be worried more about creating game sense. I think you need to be more, in my opinion, because if you can get your kids thinking and you can get your kids playing, you can always iron out details as they get older. If they progress, if they jump from recreation, if they jump to AA or AAA later, you can always start to iron out deficiencies or whatever you want to call them at that time. But the one thing that gets hard is to actually teach intelligence later on. All for the same reason like we spoke about before, is that when you have a kid that's younger, he's going to be able to pick up languages because they're just sponges, you know. And if we can teach more of the game intelligence, and that's a little bit more playing, that's a little bit more, you know, situational based inside of like where the different areas on the ice that we can get them playing and working in triangles and finding space and time, you know, the other stuff we can always start to iron out as they get older, if there's really a problem. But if we sit there for an hour each week and we just go complete ISO, where is the kid going to be at the end of the year? You know, that's 4 hours a month that he's getting practice time. Over 9 months, it's not many hours on the ice. And I would even beg to differ that a lot of these kids that, you know, probably do, what do you want to call it, recreation hockey, some of them probably do camps and different things at the same time here and there, right? So they're going to get their ISO there. So if you're really going to look at your organization, then I'd be thinking more along the small area games, different kind of environments, like different situational stuff that you want to be, anything that can go with decision making. Where do I pass? Do I have support? Where are my triangles? These are the things I'd be really trying to teach to the young kids, because those are the things that they can really grasp right away. And if they're doing other stuff and other activities, they're going to get their ISO anyway. But as a coach, this is where my main thought's going to be, because at the recreation level, they're probably still playing games as well, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So there's your what do you want to call it? There's your exam. So as a coach, if I'm doing a practice more based on situations and small area games and decision making, every time we play a game, I can be able to watch that game and then take out pieces for my next practice and see where we're at and how do we keep building in these, where our deficiencies at. And then you can keep building in that sense.
And obviously the other thing that comes along with that approach that is inherent, and you've already addressed this, is that it still helps players develop their skill.
100%. 100%. And I'd even probably the recreation coaches, they're probably not paid. No. So I'm guessing their direction or their directive from the organization as far as education wise and everything else is like, you're not going to have much as far as understanding exactly where that kid is at that moment. And they're probably not going to have so much time to actually get to know the kid as well. Well, the fastest and easiest way to get to know anybody is to put them inside of an environment that's going to really challenge them, make them think, and make them organize themselves. And from that's where my coaching becomes a little bit easier, because now I start to see everybody for who they really are. And then I can start developing and creating practices based off of that.
So there you heard it, coaches. Put them in environments where they have to think, where they have to organize themselves. And from those environments and experiences, you will now get to know them and be able to help their development further, practice after practice, year after year. That's a very powerful statement, Ted. I love that.
But I mean, that's where we're at, right? I mean, this is where we want to be able to go with it at. I mean, we want to be able to actually, push these kids into an environment and speed up the learning process as quick as possible. And I don't think I've seen anything more frustrating than the kid that's a wizard in practice, but he can't play. It's so frustrating on that sense where it's like now you're trying to understand and help that kid, and you talk to the parents, you talk to everybody else, and they're like, yeah, but we do this, we do that. He's got private coach, he's got all this. Yeah, but you know what? He has no sense of the game. And when we talk about isolation, I go, that's the part where I'm always wondering is like, well, where does that teach the hockey IQ at? I just listened to NBA on TNT. I don't know if you saw this clip with Charles Barkley, Shaq. I can't remember the other two that host it, but they had Matthew Tkachuk on.
Yes.
Did you see that one on Twitter?
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, and they're all talking about, hey, the skating or the stick work, which is the most important? And Matthew Tkachuk said, the hockey sense. The hockey IQ is the most important. It's what separates us. Everybody, he goes, the skating, the guys are in the NHL or the guys are in the American League or the guys are over here in Europe or somewhere else. A lot of them can probably skate better. A lot of them probably can handle the puck better. But the separator is the thing that's between the ears. Like, can I actually understand the game? Do I know when to use my skill at the right time? Do I know how to hit that hole? And I'll tell you what, the kids that don't have much skill and all that kind of stuff, quote unquote, compared to the AAA kids, you put them in the right environment, they'll start finding those spaces quite easily.
Yeah.
And that will help them advance. And once they get into better hands or, coach with more knowledge or organizations that have more ice time as they move up that ladder, all the other things will start to carry over and come through.
Excellent. Well, Ted, time is getting a little lengthy here. And I know in Switzerland it's a holiday today, I believe.
Same as in the States, yeah.
In the US, yeah, we don't have one here. So I don't want to keep you from your family much longer if it's a holiday. Where can coaches find you? Where, how do they find you on the internet, on social media?
I got off. I'm on Instagram, but I don't use it anymore. I'm more on Twitter these days. It's the area, and for me, when I speak to you, speaking is fine, but a lot of times, as you've seen with my Twitter, like when I can express myself through writing, it's a little bit easier and stuff like that. And so there, it's my last name, Suihkonen, 77. So that's the best place. And I got to speak with you a little bit later about some other things, but there'll be some new things coming out as far as coaching courses and stuff, education-wise, that I'm trying to put together on this end to help the masses out there understand, like what we're trying to speak about and which way we're trying to push the education course as far as making sure that every player has the best environment to grow up in.
Fabulous stuff. Ted Suihkonen has been our guest today. Ted, on behalf of myself, all the coaches listening, and Hockey Eastern Ontario, I thank you so much for your time and your insights today. And coaches, seek him out on Twitter. There is a daily wealth of interesting comments and insightful comments from Ted around these areas and around learning and around how to build your environments and to put youth players in the proper place to learn and become skillful. So again, Ted, thank you very much. Hope to cross paths with you and stay connected.
We'll stay connected and hope to get you over here one of these days.
I'd be more than interested to come over. Would love to. I've visited Switzerland. I'd love to come over and do a little bit of hockey work with you. It'd be fabulous. Thank you.
Perfect. Appreciate your time. Thank you.